Hey you guys, in this video I'm going to fully explain the modes. The 7 diatonic modes are a group of scales that you should learn, and really the best way to think about them is like they're positions of the major scale. So if you know about the pentatonic scales, like the 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, the modes are kind of like positions of the major scale. So let's start there with the major scale. Just to keep this simple, I'm going to play a C major scale, and I'm going to put my second finger on the 8th fret of the low E string. And these are movable shapes. Everything we're going to talk about today is a movable shape. So I'm going to call out the finger I'm using instead of the fret that I'm on. But if you want absolute clarity, I'm going to throw a chart on the screen, and you can get charts in the description for anything you see in this video. So like I said, second finger starting on the 8th fret of the low E string. Then your 4th finger is going to go to the 10th fret. On the A string, it's going to be 1, 2, 4. On the D string, 1, 3, 4. On the G string, 1, 3, 4 again. On the B string, 2, 4. And on the high E string, 1, 2. So the entirety of a C major scale should look like this. So that is the major scale. You'll learn in a second that sometimes we call that the Ionian mode. But I want to make a point before we get too far into this video, and that's that if you're not very comfortable with this major scale, pause, take a second, and really practice this. Maybe take a few days and really get this scale under your hands. Understand that it's a movable shape. You can move this all around. So if I were to move it down to like a G, then I could just play a G major scale using the same shape. Same goes for all over the fretboard. You can move this anywhere you want. The more you mess around and get comfortable with this scale, you realize it's very useful. It is literally the fundamental scale of all of Western music, but practically speaking on guitar, it has this one big limitation, and that is it only covers like a very small span of frets here. So let's say I'm using the C major scale to take a solo in the key of C major, and I want to go lower on the fretboard, or maybe higher on the fretboard. Right now, I kinda can't, because I only know the one position of the major scale. This is where the modes come in. Modes are variations of the major scale that change the tonal center. And when we do that, we get versions of the scale that we can play all over the fretboard and unlock total freedom. And that can sound kind of confusing, kind of like I'm using jargon. You're probably wondering what a tonal center is. All that will make sense very, very shortly. We're going to start by me just showing you how to play the modes. I'm literally just going to throw the 7 scale shapes at you. It might feel confusing, it might feel like drinking from a hose, but everything will make sense because after I show you how to play them, then I'm going to explain them so that they make total sense to you, and you can see how the 7 modes connect together into a map that covers the entire fretboard and literally allows you to play across the whole guitar. So one thing to know about modes, even before you really understand them, just to play them, you should understand they all happen in the same key. All of these scales occur within the same key. So we're going to start in our example key. We're just going to stay where we were before in the key of C major. And we're going to start with the C major scale that we recapped at the beginning of the video. Up until this point in your guitar playing, you've probably only known that scale as the C major scale, but the truth is, it is also called the Ionian mode, and it is the first of the 7 modes. Above the Ionian mode is going to be the D Dorian mode. The Dorian mode is the second of the 7 modes. Here's how you play it. I want to say really quick before we move on, the reason I'm not calling out frets is all of these are movable shapes. So, the C major scale, the C Ionian mode that we just learned, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's a movable scale shape. You can move that all around. This is the D Dorian mode because it starts on D. But I could move this all over the place. I could start on A and it would be the A Dorian mode. And just to clarify one final thing about that point, that these are movable scale shapes, is that they actually lock together and they always move together. So it'll never be the case, we just had C Ionian, only playing 1 octave there for the sake of time, and then D Dorian. It'll it'll never be the case that you have like your Ionian mode right here at the 8th fret, and then your Dorian mode is like down here at the 4th fret or something like that. That's impossible. These two like lock together. I think of pentatonic scales in the same way that the, like the first position, the minor pentatonic scale, locks into the second position, the major pentatonic scale. The modes all kind of lock together in that same way. I'll just go ahead and tell you our next mode is the Phrygian mode, and the Phrygian mode is always going to lock right in above the Dorian mode, same way that the Dorian locks into the Ionian. All these move together, and we'll get more clarity on that point in just a second. I just wanted to point it out before we get too far into this. Hey you guys, Editing Kevin from the future here. I wanted to clarify something that I didn't in the video, and that's the naming convention of the modes. Works just like any other scale. So we have, for example, we were just talking about the Dorian mode. The D Dorian mode is just called that because the first note, the root note, is D. You could move it around theoretically if we were in a different key here, and if like if A was our Dorian mode, then it would be the A Dorian mode. That's the naming convention. Anyway, like I said, our next mode is the Phrygian mode. And this is going to be an E Phrygian mode because we're starting here on E. And I think I already mentioned this, but I'll remind you, charts for everything you see here are available in the description. Now, just one half step above where we were in the Phrygian mode, we're going to have our Lydian mode right there. This is going to be F Lydian. Our next mode is going to be the Mixolydian mode, and it is going to be located right above the Lydian mode, but because we're getting so high up on the fretboard here, I'm going to move back 12 frets and sort of reset. If you'll remember, everything after the 12th fret, all the notes just repeat, and it works both ways. So if you're playing some up here, you can move it back down. I'm going to play G Mixolydian, but I'm going to do it down here. That doesn't violate anything we're talking about how the modes lock together. If you have any questions on that, ask in the comments. Anyway, like I said, this is G Mixolydian. Above Mixolydian is going to be A Aeolian. This is also just the minor scale. If you know the normal minor scale, Aeolian is just that exact same scale. Like I said, A Aeolian. Finally, the 7th mode, this is the one nobody likes, is the Locrian mode. And in our case, this is the B Locrian mode. And then above the Locrian mode, you might notice that we are back at our C Ionian mode. It just all starts over again. That is how you play all 7 modes. But again, don't click off right away. I want to further explain how all these scales connect together and help you understand where these modes come from so that you can actually use them. Let's start over at the music theory desk. Okay, welcome to the music theory desk. These are the 7 notes of the C major scale. And I want to focus on that word scale for a second because as musicians, we have a mistaken idea of what scales are. We sometimes erroneously think that these 7 notes actually are the scale, but really that word has several meanings. And the most important meaning of the word scale is actually something like an abstract set, because you see, scales actually extend in both directions forever. And I have a limited number of sticky notes, but imagine this scale as an infinite series of notes that keeps this order, but just extends in both directions literally forever. Now, that's a completely inoperable idea because you can't play an abstract set on the guitar. That's nonsense. So you have to just pick a starting place. So for a C major scale, we pick a pretty logical starting place, which is the note C. And then we play our 7 notes, and then, sometimes when we're playing the scale, we include C again at the end. But really, a scale is just 7 notes. It's these 7 notes. This is the C major scale. This is the Ionian mode that I showed you guys just a second ago. And if you look on the fretboard for a convenient little pattern that contains all these notes, you'll probably land on this. which of course is just the regular Ionian mode that I showed you guys earlier. Now, I think the most useful way to understand modes is by just redoing our starting point here. So, for example, if we were to, instead of play C to C, if we were to start on D and then shift our group of 7 notes over one, this would be the D Dorian mode. And if you look for a convenient pattern to play these notes, you'll probably find this. Which is, of course, the D Dorian scale, or the D Dorian mode that I showed you guys earlier. This is how the modes work. There's a parent scale. In this case, it's the C major scale, right? And then to play the D Dorian mode, or your Dorian mode, you play the same notes in the same order, you just adjust your starting and ending places, right? If we wanted to play the E Phrygian mode, again, we would just shift one over so that our starting and ending places are now different, but it's the same notes and they're in the same order, right? F Lydian would be next, right? So you just shift over again. Then G Mixolydian, right? Then A Aeolian. I'm running out of space over here on the frame, but if you wanted to start here and you would end right here, this would be A Aeolian, right? Then finally B Locrian until we're all the way back to C Ionian. So you can think of modes as a little window of 7 notes, because it's a diatonic scale, it must have 7 notes, and they're all based on the parent mode. They're based on the C Ionian scale, but we just shift that window and that creates the other 6 modes. Now this is where I want to bring in our video sponsor, Noisy Clan. They've made this really useful tool called the Scale Compass. Now, if you guys haven't heard of Noisy Clan before, they're a great company that makes incredible music learning tools, and they're all about getting you to play more. I've worked with them before, I love their stuff, and they sent me this new tool, the Scale Compass, and I've been really impressed. What I like so much about this tool is that it maps out all the notes of the C major scale or of any major scale all across the fretboard. There's a slider on the back, and you can use it to adjust which scale you want to see. Obviously, in this video, we've been talking about the C major scale the whole time. And so when you adjust this slider, all of these notes are the notes of the C major scale. There's some interesting patterns here. It shows you outlined in green are very convenient major scale options. Outlined in the dotted blue line are some interesting minor scale options. But like I said, I legitimately think this tool is the perfect companion for understanding modes because it kind of expands on what we were just talking about, how there's a window of 7 notes. So for example, we've been talking about the C major scale, right? I know that C is right here, right? And if we just keep coloring in our window of 7 notes, then we will get a C major scale, right? This little green outline, like I said, that identifies a C major scale. But you could also use this tool to identify like a D Dorian mode, because like I said, C major is the parent scale of all the modes within that key. So if we started on a D, like we did right here, you could just identify the window of 7 notes going all the way up. That would identify a D Dorian mode. You would have that outlined right here very clearly. I love this tool because it makes it extremely obvious that the C major scale is an abstract set of 7 notes that can be mapped all across the fretboard, and that the modes, if you want to explore that, they are just contained within this abstract set that exists as a map across the whole fretboard. Like I said, there's a bunch of other cool features. I really like the fact that it shows you the relative minor. Obviously, A is the relative minor of C major. And most of all, I think the thing this tool does best is show you that the map and the relationships between the notes doesn't actually change. It's just the key that changes. So obviously, everything we've been doing in this video has been in the key of C major, just because that helps keep it simple. But if you wanted to move to, say, the key of E major, right? All the maps and all the relationships would stay exactly the same. It's just that it would shift around, and the scrolling of this tool really kind of demonstrates that very obviously, which I really like. I have a discount link in the description if you guys want to check this out for yourself. I think it's a really valuable tool for developing a complete understanding not only of the major scale, but also the modes as they relate to the major scale. I'd really appreciate it if you would consider picking one up for yourself. Alright you guys, one final note to round out this video. I want to talk briefly about tonal centers. Over the music theory desk we were saying that the C major scale is not just a scale, but it's also kind of an abstract set. And that when we start and end on C, we get the Ionian mode specifically. In that case we would say that C is the tonal center, because when I play that, obviously C kind of feels like home there. When I play the scale, you can actually hear it. Like if I were to stop one note short, it feels like it wants to resolve to C. That's what makes C the tonal center of the C Ionian mode. If it was D Dorian, for example, now D is our tonal center. Because when I go to play it, you know, D kind of feels like home there. D feels like the tonal center. The whole point of saying all that is, you know, over at the music theory desk we were talking about changing the starting and ending places. Sometimes you'll hear that referred to as changing the tonal center, and that's what helps change the mode. Another thing you might notice about modes is that they can kind of sound very majory or minory. So obviously the C Ionian mode sounds very major. It is literally the major scale. But you might also notice that, like for example, the G Mixolydian mode, the corresponding Mixolydian mode in this key, it doesn't quite sound like the major scale, but it has sort of a major vibe to it. The point I'm making is that the modes do have tonalities. So just to let you know, the Ionian mode is sort of like the most major scale, but it's not the only major scale. The Lydian and Mixolydian modes are also major modes. To get really definitional about it, they have a major third. If you know what that is from triads, that also makes those modes major. Correspondingly, obviously the Aeolian mode is the minor scale. It is the most minor scale, but the Dorian mode and the Phrygian mode also are minor scales. They're not the minor scales, but they have minor thirds, and that makes them minor scales. The only other one is the Locrian mode, which has a diminished tonality. Some people say it's a minor scale, but that's kind of splitting hairs music theory-wise. It has a diminished tonality, unlike major and minor. I know we're kind of getting off in the weeds. I try to make my videos accessible to beginners, but I want this to serve as kind of a complete guide to the modes. If you know about harmonic theory and you understand the harmonization of the major scale, the tonality of the modes follows the tonality of the 7 diatonic chords. So if you know in a key that the first chord is always major, and then the order is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, the modes follow that exact same tonality. One final point about the modes, and we're going to go over this really quickly because truthfully what I'm about to say could get its own series of videos, but they can also kind of function as keys. So I know in this video I've been talking so much about how each mode is basically a subsidiary of its parent major scale. And that's true, but if you have a chord progression or a song that uses a chord progression, and that progression resolves to a chord that is not the one chord, that's not the parent major chord, then we often talk about the mode as if it is a key. So let me give you an example of this. A lot of times when you're playing funk or Motown, you'll see these chord progressions that are 2, it'll be the 2 chord. In this case, like if we were in the key of C major, the 2 chord would be D minor. It would be the 2 chord to the 5 chord. In this case, it would be, you could play it as G major, but I'm playing it as G, whatever, dominant 7. If I were to kind of throw some funk on this, if I were to try to resolve to C, which is technically the 1 chord, that would sound like totally out of place. It resolves to D minor. Even though in this context, D minor, I mean, it's the 2 chord. It's not the 1 chord, the major chord that everything resolves to. In this case, if you were trying to take a solo or maybe write a melody, you would really want to emphasize the notes that are in the D Dorian mode. Because we're using the D Dorian mode, and because the chord progression resolves to the 2 minor chord, in this case D minor, you could kind of say that D Dorian is the key. Again, from a theoretical perspective, we're smart guitar players, so we understand that really it's sort of C major that's running the show and determining all the notes and everything in this situation, but even so, on a practical level, you would not be mistaken to say that this song is in the key of D Dorian. And now that I've truly lost all the beginners and intermediates who are watching this video, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Hey you guys, Kevin from the Medium Future here. I'm shooting the video right now and I'm in between takes and I'm pacing, and I can't figure out where to put this section where I explain the Greek names of the modes because it doesn't flow naturally anywhere else in the video, so I'll just sit it here at the end. I have searched for years for a real answer to this, and it's really hard to find one. I've asked actual Greek students of mine. The channel has put me in contact with people from all around the world who want guitar lessons. If you want a guitar lesson, check out the link in the description. But all my Greek students tell me that like some of the words kind of mean something, and then some of the words, most of them are just basically gibberish. I think maybe Dorian has some architectural meaning or something like that. The best answer I ever got was actually years ago from this old school jazz player, and he told me that there's this fictional, it's like a myth, and the myth is that long ago there were these 7 Greek islands, and on the islands lived these people who made music, and that on the island, on the Dorian island, for example, the Dorians were making music, and the scale they used is what we now call the Dorian scale, and that like, you know, on the island of Ionia, music was made using what we now call the Ionian scale. Now, like I said, that story is totally fictional, but I don't think all the locations are fictional. I looked it up on Google Maps one time because, I mean, I don't know Greek geography, and there is a Lydian Sea, so maybe some of the locations are real. If you're from one of them, let me know. Anyway, none of that is going to make you a better guitar player, but I just think it's interesting, so I'm putting it in the video. All right, and with that, that is truly and honestly everything you need to know about modes. We covered a lot of ground in this video. The question I always get from here is, what do I do next? Like, what do I do with all these modes now that I know them and can play them and understand them? I think the most fun answer to that question is start taking solos. So actually, as an accompanying lesson to this lesson, over on my Patreon, I made a lesson. It's a 4-step guide to writing and improvising solos. And it builds on the stuff we learned here. It'll take the modes. We're going to talk about how to actually use them. And if you're interested in that, you like my teaching style, I think you'll really, really like it. Anyway, check out the Patreon. Thank you again so much to Noisy Clan for sponsoring. You guys really got to get one of those scale compasses. I think that if I had had one of those when I started, it would make it a lot easier because I didn't immediately understand the idea of like mapping an abstract set across the fretboard and then sort of carving out the modes from there. I thought that we were making up the modes rather than discovering them, and I think a tool like the scale compass makes this really easy to understand. Anyway, as always, thank you guys for watching.